evening. My name is Ismail Serageldin. I am the former Vice President of the World Bank, the former Chairman of the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, and also the Emeritus Librarian of Alexandria. And I'm very honored to be invited to chair and moderate this particular session of the ICEF annual meeting. As you observe, we are online, and because, of course, 2020 is the year of the pandemic, and COVID-19 has been a major public health crisis, but it has also been a crisis that has engendered many other problems. Among these, it has generated a major economic crisis because of the impact it has had on transactions between and within countries, and the enormous effect it has had on contracting the economies of the world, and on, in fact, also increasing unemployment in many, many countries. But it has also had a major impact on other sectors like education, and also what we are concerned with here, which is the food and nutrition system. In fact, it has put the food and nutrition system of the world under great stress. Partly consumers are paying higher prices, partly because supply chains have been disrupted, partly children are deprived of school feeding programs, and families who rely on food assistance are finding life even more difficult than usual. And women, we should be reminded, are the primary caregivers in most families, and as a result of the pandemic, in fact, have seen not only their incomes reduced, but also their burdens increased. And we'll come back to that. Today, there is much to be said about the COVID-19 pandemic, but clearly, this session is devoted to agriculture. I will just mention three things: that at a time when the economic crisis is enormous as a result of the measures that were taken to contain the pandemic, the rich countries have been able to put, in the case of the United States, $3.8 trillion, in the case of Europe, close to $1 trillion. But many, of course, of the poorest developing countries, where the challenges of food security are very high, do not have the means to do that, and we, the collective group of humanity, should do something to help them with that. Tests, therapeutics, vaccines are being developed. And what should be done is that the international community must make sure that these tests, therapeutics, and vaccines, when they are available, are made available to all who need them, not just to those who can afford them. Although climate change has been pushed out of the news, it is not out of the reality of our challenges. And we will have to cope with it again, even though there's been a slight reduction in emissions because of the economic contractions. And if we are going to be able to confront the objective of reaching our sustainable development goals by 2030, much will have to be done on these things. And that requires science, technology, and innovation to come up with disruptive new ideas. And among these will be, how do we provide food to a population, not only in poorest countries, but also which is rapidly urbanizing. And we will have more to say about that in this panel. Finally, it's also important to note that nutrition is important for everybody, and of course it's a fundamental human right for women in particular. But I would like to point out that much of our thinking about feeding children is focused on children after they get to school and programs to feed children there. But one of the fundamental vectors is to have healthy mothers. So if pregnant women are well nourished, they will be able to give birth to full weight babies, not low weight babies. And that is important because that reduces the infant morbidity and mortality, and also allows the mother to lactate and to breastfeed her baby in the first 6 months after birth. And that period from the last trimester of pregnancy to the first 6 months are also extremely important for the development of the brain of the child. So nutrition targeted at the mothers as a vector is a fundamental part of dealing with reducing wastage and stunting among children and infant mortality as well. And that means that we have to think about the position and role of women as we develop the approaches to strengthening resilience in our food and nutrition systems globally. Finally, the poorest countries of the world have major problems ahead of them, and the current contraction is in the economies of the world is going to be quite serious. Unlike the US with the dollar, or the Europeans with the euro, or even Japan with the yen, they are not able to generate additional resources, and they risk being crushed by debt, and by having a debt overhang, and by having a major reduction in the values of their currencies. And so we need to think about how all of these things come together. Generally speaking, as a simple motto, global problems require global answers. That is true of climate change, it is true of the pandemic, it is true of the economic disaster, and it's also true of the resilience in food security. And we need to strengthen the multilateral organizations that deal with these issues and bring the best experience and wisdom from all over the world to bear on these problems. And thus, we have on this panel 4 exceptional speakers. I'm not going to give all the details of their CVs, which are very impressive, but which you can find. And we will start with a true representative of this international type of organization, which has an enormous experience in dealing with this. And my first speaker will be Mr. Olivier Dubois of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And Mr. Dubois, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting me and allowing me to share some thoughts on the energy food nexus and what FAO is doing about it. On the energy, it's linked to some 10 SDGs, which are marked with a star on this slide. Is closely linked to food security. It's needed to produce food at every stage of the food chains, and this applies both to low and high-tech food systems. For instance, vertical farming requires a lot of energy to bring water and nutrients to the upper levels of the farm. In terms of access, the energy costs influence the food costs, but also the income of the farmers, and energy for food chains can also provide local jobs. Utilization, this concerns mainly the energy for cooking. If you don't have enough of it, then you cannot cook properly, and this affects the quality of your food. Stability is changes in energy prices that can change the other factors. Also a huge water energy food nexus. Currently, many people face food insecurity, but also do not have good quality water and do not have access to reliable energy. And things might get worse if we don't change the way we do things, taking into account that a lot of natural resources are already degraded, but also the climate change challenges. the basic issue is that, yes, energy is needed to produce food, but the way it is used currently in food chains is unsustainable. Click. This is because the energy used in food chains represents about 30% of the global available energy, so a lot. Most of it occurs beyond the farm gates and in the form of fossil fuels. Click. At the same time, the energy used in the 30% food which is lost globally is also lost. Click. But also, interestingly, agri-food chains can produce energy, for instance, from residues from food production. Energy is part of a climate change problem when it's used in agri-food systems, because it's mainly fossil fuels. And this is used mainly in post-harvest stages, which are the blue parts of the pie chart on this slide. And this represents about 20 to 25% of GHG emissions from food systems. And this issue is often overlooked because the energy used beyond the farm gate is usually accounted for in energy statistics or industry statistics. But energy is also part of the climate change solution in terms of mitigation. Obviously, if you use renewable energy, you reduce GHG emissions. You also reduce GHG emissions if, thanks to energy, you reduce food losses. Sustainable bioenergy use also reduces mitigation, and the use of byproducts of biofuels for animal feed is also good, because it means less land is needed to produce animal feed. In terms of adaptation, local access to energy, but also additional income from energy increases local farmers' resilience. Carbon sequestration, if you have agroforestry systems where you have the trees are used as energy crops, but also increased soil carbon sequestration through the byproducts of bioenergy, such as biofertilizer and biochar. Specifically on bioenergy, I think most people agree that it's badly needed to achieve climate action and mitigation. For example, the International Energy Agency considers that in the next decades, you will need 2 to 4 times more bioenergy, and in particular 3 to 10 times more biofuels. Also in the NDCs for Africa, more than 80% mention bioenergy as a way to address their climate change commitments. The IPCC reports again confirm this, saying, okay, bioenergy is an important pathway for climate action. It is risky, but there are ways to address the risk through the use of residues, but also multiple land use, combining energy crops and food crops, for example, through agroforestry systems. So what is FAO doing on energy for agri-food? The solution that we present is what we call the Energy Smart Food Program, which basically tries to ensure adequate access to modern energy where needed through improved energy efficiency, gradually use more renewable energy, sustainable bioenergy, and a water energy food nexus approach. There are 4 areas of work in the FAO Energy Smart Food Program. One is renewable energy in food chains, the other one is sustainable bioenergy, also energy in protracted crisis situations, and using a water energy food nexus approach. Concerning the nexus approach, we developed a methodology that looks at the nexus situation concerning water, energy, food, but also labor and capital, both in the context level, so territorial level, and these are the the different colors in this pentagon. Click. We also look at the situation for particular interventions, such as an irrigation system represented in this black pentagon. Click. But basically, this is not enough. Click. You need to look at the status of the nexus of the intervention versus the territorial level nexus to see if it's sustainable. Click. We can also use this methodology to compare different renewable energy systems in the same context, like shown in the bottom part of this slide. We've used this methodology to develop another methodology to assess the environmental, social, economic, and financial costs and benefits of using renewable energy in food sector. And we've used that in the milk, vegetable, and rice value chains in 5 countries, Tunisia, Kenya, Senegal, Tanzania, and the Philippines. And this resulted in recommendations for investments in renewable energy in food chains. We're going to use the same methodology for the fisheries sector in Papua New Guinea. And for example, 2 results of this cost-benefit analysis for Kenya milk chains. One is a small system, the other one is a bigger one, and the quantitative aspects are the bar charts, financial results, economic results, income results, taxes, employment generation, but you have more qualitative aspects, non-monetized aspects, like soil quality, water quality, access to energy, which are basically circles. If the circles are green, it's fine. If they are red, it's problematic. If they are orange, it's basically so-so. Energy links to food loss and waste. We wrote a report on this, and these are very, very important. If you have enough energy to undertake good post-harvest operations, obviously you reduce food losses. The work on sustainable energy developed like a toolbox which has tools at project level, but also at regional, national level, and we can assess the situation before the implementation of bioenergy, but also after the implementation of bioenergy. FAO's key messages on bioenergy is that the sustainability of bioenergy is context-specific. Therefore, its assessment must be based on reality and not only models and global studies. The good news is that we have tools and knowledge to do sustainable bioenergy in the right way, and therefore, per se, bioenergy is neither good or bad. What matters is the way it's managed. And we think that bioenergy should be viewed as another opportunity for responsible investment in sustainable agriculture and rural development. Thank you for your attention.
Dubois, thank you for this overview on what we might call the, as you said, the energy smart food. Energy smart food is an essential part, I guess, of addressing the future of a food and nutrition system. And you did mention, I'm very glad that you did, which was the food losses and waste, because in many of the poorest countries, we are losing about 35 to 40% of the crops post-harvest. And not to mention that in the rich countries, we also have an enormous amount of waste, partly because of the expiration dates and the fact that in America, for example, they will serve you huge amounts of food that practically no human being can finish all the food that is being served, and it gets thrown. So we do have an efficiency of utilization aspect there. Now that brings me to our second speaker, and that is Dr. Iiyama Miyuki of the JIRCAS Center, the Japan International Research Center for Agricultural Sciences. and she will talk to us about the agendas for agricultural, not just R&D, but R4D, R for development in the developing countries. What are the post-COVID-19 agendas for agricultural research, and how these are interlinking and addressing the complexities that have been touched upon in this first presentation. So the floor is yours, madam.
First, I feel very honored to be given this opportunity. My organization, JIRCAS, is celebrating its 50th year anniversary this year. It has represented Japan in implementing joint agriculture research projects in the developing countries. Facing with the compounded challenges of the global food system today and the centrality of the agricultural development of the developing countries, however, we are asked to look for more effective modalities of implementation and international collaboration. Today, I will emphasize the urgency of investing in science-based agriculture for the developing countries by contextualizing it in the challenges of the global food system. Since the beginning of 2020, the COVID-19 outbreak has been sweeping the world. Since WHO declared it as a pandemic in mid-March, the implementation of movement restrictions has led to the suspension of economic activities accompanied by a global economic crisis. In turn, a temporary fall in the greenhouse gas emissions, climate change has not spared us. Instead, extreme natural disasters, not experienced in decades, are affecting our lives and planet. Already by last year, the global community was aware that the global food system was in crisis as undermining planetary and human health. With this year's experience, we foresee more of catastrophes under the business as usual scenarios. To avoid such a future, it is urgent to mitigate emissions and biodiversity loss from agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. How science, technologies, and innovation, or STI, can contribute to fixing the global food system? In order to identify intervention areas, we need to understand the problem of the current system. We will acknowledge the heterogeneity and context specificity of agriculture sectors. Still, just in order to facilitate the discussion, we assume the global food system is consisting of the two sectors, industrial agriculture and smallholder agriculture. Two sectors present distinctive features, including technological evolutions, environmental footprints, nutrition discourses, and then bottlenecks of transformation. In order to understand the bottlenecks of transformation, let me refer to the concept of yield gaps used by agronomists. First, assume yield of crops depends on the interaction of genetics, environment, and management. Attainable yield is defined as a yield achieved under near optimum G by E by M. In reality, attainable yield is achieved only theoretically. Farmers usually do not have access to materials optimized for their specific farm environment. They also do not implement recommended agronomy practices due to labor and capital constraints. As a result, there are gaps between attainable yield and actual yield. In industrial agriculture, a typical farm operates a monoculture of calorie-dense staple crops at large farm. A farm manager often applies a large amount of fertilizer across a farm to maximize output. It can achieve near 100% attainable yield, while redundant chemicals become emissions and pollutions. In contrast, smallholder agriculture, the diversity of farm is very high, even within the relatively small regions. Thus, the standardized package of technology is rarely optimal for an individual farmer. As a result, the yields are far below attainable yields. Now we try to understand the global food system at the juncture of four crises. First, industrial agriculture is a major driver of overstepping the planetary boundaries and climate change, and agriculture is accounting for a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. The smallholder agriculture is most severely affected by the impacts of changing climate, especially by extreme events. Facing the growing population while chronically suffering from stagnant productivity, small farmers expand farm and grazing land. Deforestation and biodiversity loss have then increased wildlife, livestock, human contacts, with increasing chances of zoonotic diseases. Once zoonotic diseases become pandemic, the global economy plunges into deep crisis, as we are witnessing now. Turning around the vicious cycle of the four crises requires intervention, especially targeting smallholder agriculture. Strategic areas include climate change mitigation, adaptation, production of quality and diverse food, sustainable intensification, and conservation. Aside from technology development, all stakeholders need to share information on how to transform the global food system into a sustainable one. In order to avoid climate change and pandemics, we must conserve 50% of the land on Earth. According to a paper just published 2 weeks ago, however, a significant portion of the intact ecosystem was already modified by human activities. Most affected ecosystems are found in tropical and subtropical grassland, savanna, shrubland ecosystems, and Southeast Asian forests. There, the growing food demand to feed the growing population has led to the higher pressures on ecosystems. In other words, the developing countries are where science-based agriculture is urgently needed to achieve sustainable agriculture intensification, even from the planetary point of view. In some parts of developing countries such as sub-Saharan Africa, doubling population is projected by 2050. Yet, these areas are the ones where yield gaps are large. Actually, yields are only 10 to 20% of the attainable yields. It means if science-based agriculture enables food demand to be met by improving yields on existing croplands through the state-of-the-art science, we can avoid catastrophes in the global food system. We come back to this framework now with the concept of sustainable agriculture intensification. This concept is to utilize the best multidisciplinary science to improve crop yields per unit of land without damaging environment. Conventional modern technology have tended to have economies of scale. They are often too expensive for small-scale operators to adopt. Now we have smart technologies. Smart technology have potential to reduce costs of implementing the fine-scale optimization of G by E by M. This technology may provide leapfrogging opportunities for developing countries. For example, a crop has a high yield potential, yet its actual yield is much low due to various constraints and management factors, leaving large yield gaps. Furthermore, the increasing frequency of climate change can negatively affect the yield potential itself, as conventional cultivars may no longer be optimal under changed climate conditions. The advantage of smart technology includes its potential to accelerate the genomic development through tools such as phenotyping and then genome editing. The advancement of digital tools can also allow the greater precision of management decisions. By adapting smart tools combined with sound science, farmers may be able to close yield gaps. To do so, enable conditions are necessary. First, interdisciplinarity is essential. For example, collaboration between agronomy, engineering, and even socioeconomics. While digital agriculture attracts business interest, public investment is still critical, especially in research and development for areas of public goods. Finally, collaboration between research and implementing agencies are needed timelier to respond to accelerated challenges of the global food system agendas. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miyuki Iiyama, for this excellent presentation and a chance to also say happy birthday to Jerkas on the 50th anniversary of this wonderful work. There are, I'm sure, a lot of questions that we will have. I will just give you one right now to think about, namely how we can combine both the ICT revolution that brings us enormous capability for mapping soil and land conditions, even at the smallest scale, through satellite and other ways of communicating, and the availability of handhelds even in the poorest countries. And secondly, the new biology and specifically to be able to bring certain traits such as salt tolerance, drought tolerance, better nutrition, deeper roots, etc., to deal with the climate change impacts that are going to impact on this area, which you pointed out in the tropics, for example. 95% of sub-Saharan African agriculture is not irrigated, it is rain-fed, and we know we are going to have erratic rains. Northern Africa will become even more dry. The dry lands generally will face serious problems of sandstorms and heat. And so on. So we'll come back to how to combine the new biology and the new ICT to cope with that part. Now, one of the things that has not been sufficiently mentioned is really the fact that although we're going to have population growth, a very large part of that population is going to be in urban areas. And we will be moving from the notion of systems farming and small villages and so on to the fact that cities, whether you're talking about Nairobi or Lagos or Cairo or whatever, are going to have to be fed, and that will touch upon some of the weakest parts of our food and agricultural system, because the roads are poor, the infrastructure is poor, the utilization of trucks is a problem, and so on. And thus I'm very happy to present our next speaker, David Rosenberg from Aero Farms, who has been a true innovator and came up with new solutions that's 100% circular and recycling to deal with vertical agriculture in urban areas and many other things. So without further ado, David Rosenberg, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much, David, for this very exciting presentation. I think it augurs extremely well for cities, and you are, amazing figures, deserving of the awards. 390 times the productivity, 95% less water, no pesticides, etc. The one question, though, is commercial viability. Would it be feasible to apply such technologies to the basic diet of the poorest people in the urban slums of the cities of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or even the slums of some of the biggest areas in the tropical area, whether it is in Brazil, Mexico, or in Indonesia, or India, or Egypt, whatever. So that's a question which we'll come back to, I hope. And now we come to the fourth and final presentation we have. And I have Chris Argent, who is the head of business sustainability for Asia Pacific at Syngenta, which is a leading agricultural company. And Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm honoured to participate in today's discussion on the role of science and technology in agriculture in addressing the challenges of climate change. Next slide, please. First, a little bit about Syngenta. As our chair mentioned, Syngenta is a leading agricultural company helping to improve global food security by enabling millions of farmers to make better use of available resources. And we deliver our solutions dedicated to one clear purpose, and that's bringing plant potential to life. The unlimited potential of plants is at the heart of what we do. And as a science-based R&D company, we spend approximately $1.3 billion a year on R&D, regularly bringing new products to market, even with long lead times of sometimes a decade or so. But for our innovations to benefit all, they must contribute to the sustainability of our planet through helping to address a complex, interconnected set of global challenges. Next slide, please. Agriculture and climate change. I mean, agriculture contributes 12% of total greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, and by 2050 there'll be 2 billion more mouths to feed globally. With a growing population driving more demand for food, fibre and fuel, science and technology is required to help farmers continue to grow crops efficiently while taking care of our planet. And Asia in particular is very vulnerable when you consider that it's home to an estimated 80% of the world's 450 million smallholder farmers. And those farmers are responsible for more than 80% of global rice production. And rice farming, we know, accounts for 10% of global methane emissions, using 40% of global irrigation water. Next slide, please. And we're seeing the climate change challenges in Asia Pacific as we speak. These are just some recent headlines about floods and droughts and the impact that has on yields, crop production, and therefore the livelihoods of smallholder farmers throughout Asia Pacific. Erratic rainfall patterns around the world and increasing temperatures put at risk the livelihoods and food security of millions globally. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, Syngenta relaunched our Good Growth Plan, which is with a focus on helping farmers to fight climate change. It's important that with agriculture being such a big part of the climate change conundrum, that there is a solution to fighting the impact that it has on climate change. And these are the 4 pillars of our revised Good Growth Plan. And I think the 2 at the top there, accelerating innovation for farmers and nature and striving for carbon neutral agriculture, are pivotal in helping agriculture combat climate change. Investing in sustainable agricultural breakthroughs, striving for the lowest residues in crops and the environment, enhancing biodiversity and soil health, and reducing the carbon intensity of our own operations are critical to the success of the Good Growth Plan. Next slide, please. And this starts with our products. Product innovation is tremendously important in helping farmers to protect their yields in increasingly challenging conditions brought about by climate change. You can see here one particular product which protects the seeds, is applied to the seeds. It protects the rice roots, enabling the seedling during germination to emerge stronger, combating stress factors such as drought, cold and salinity, through enabling more efficient nutrient and water uptake. The comparison of a treated and untreated rice root is very clear in that photo. Next slide, please. And then you can see in field, in the conditions of water deficiency, the better crop establishment from using this particular product in the rice fields. The comparison between those 2 fields is very clear to see. The emergence of those plants is much stronger on the left of that photo there. Next slide, please. And so in addition to innovation in product lines, Syngenta is also investing into digital technology to improve agricultural efficiency. Digital technology allows farmers to pursue a higher degree of efficiency, optimize inputs and resources used for farming, and make smarter data-driven decisions. Here are 2 recent examples. The one on the left, Cropio, is a leading land management platform that provides imaging, record keeping and equipment tracking, allowing farmers to monitor all their crops and field operations such as fertiliser inputs, water use, weather information, in order to improve decision making, helping to make more targeted and efficient crop management decisions. Farm Shots is a platform used by agronomists, retailers, farmers to locate damage caused by diseases, pests or nutritional deficiencies in crops. It uses satellite imagery, and through that users are able to detect damage earlier, ensuring recommended treatments are accurate and applied before it's too late. It measures field variability, the extent of damage, and is used to track the effect of applications through time. Next slide, please. And COVID has accelerated the path to digitisation, particularly in smallholder markets here in Asia. The recent pandemic has highlighted the importance of using those digital platforms to provide at least communication at scale with farmers during these difficult times. Smallholder communities, like many other communities throughout the world, were very hard hit by the pandemic. and it's been extremely important to support farmers during this time, continue to make progress against the Sustainable Development Goals and sustainable agriculture. Agriculture was deemed an essential service, which was tremendously important to keep food security and the supply chain going, but travel into farms was clearly severely restricted. At Syngenta, we leverage digital to provide ongoing communication and support farmers through continuing to keep them updated with information on the most advanced product technology, such as a product launch in Pakistan, but connecting with farmers to provide agronomy advice at scale, such as training webinars in Indonesia, and establishing a farmer helpline in India to provide agronomic advice to farmers, but also as a health and safety helpline for farmers should they be in need. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, science underpins what we do at Syngenta, from products, application technology, to programs with farmers. The Good Growth Plan 2.0 supports farmers to adapt to the impact of climate change through access to technology, whilst encouraging agronomy practices that reduce the contributions of agriculture to climate change. Technology plays a critically important role and will only continue to do so through analysing data to promote better decision-making, connecting farmers at scale to effect impactful change, enhancing precision application and farm management techniques. Above all else, I think partnerships are critical, and that's one of the many reasons it's a great opportunity to be here with you today. It's a very complex problem, and the interactions of my fellow panelists and the discussion we'll have is a great part to demonstrate how important partnerships are to affect meaningful ongoing change. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you each and everyone for this very rich series of presentations. I've had the chance of asking questions to each of the individual presenters between the presentations, and I now have also a number of questions that have come from outside of the panel, starting with the chairman of ICEF, Mr. Nobuo Tanaka, and he says, we should be aware, of course, that the climate change is not gender neutral. Is there a specific role for women in sustainable agriculture? I tried to address some of that in my opening remarks, but if each of the speakers will make a note if they want to make a comment on this. Then we also have three other questions, and I will give you all of these questions. Two of them come from Mr. Dubois. One is addressed to David Rosenberg. How much energy does it take to run aero farms compared to conventional farming? And is that energy that aero farms uses coming from fossil fuel generation or renewable generation? There is also a question to Syngenta, to Chris Argent, which is whether precision agricultural techniques are affordable for small-scale farmers not much capitalized at all. And then there's another question from, I think, from Mr. Tanaka, but it is, what is the preferred and recommended funding scheme to accelerate agricultural automation in developing countries? Should that be a target? And if so, how to do it? How should the private money be involved to accelerate science-based agriculture? So these are additional questions that I hope you will take into account, in addition to the questions that I was giving you as the presentations were going from one to the other. And I will now go through the panel and give the floor to each of you to very briefly, about 2 minutes each, make comments about these questions. Let me start again with Mr. Dubois. your questions have been passed on to the others. Do you have any additional observations in the light of all you've heard in the panel?
Well, I mean, the question that was posed by the ICEF chairman, I mean, women obviously have a key role. I mean, we publish reports on this. They are the engine of agriculture in many countries, especially developing countries, and also food chains in general. I think David put it quite nicely at the beginning that, vertical farming is not the panacea. You cannot grow trees. Staple crops, for example, is more difficult. And a very interesting thing that I think should be done, if not already done, is to look at the ratio of energy used per kilo produced of food in vertical farming versus conventional farming. Because this is what matters at some stage. But if you don't have enough energy in the first place, in many countries, it's a big challenge, then it's very difficult. And for the precision agriculture, this was my question. It's something that has been haunting me for a while, is how do we make precision agriculture affordable to low-income farmers? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me move to Miyuki Iiyama. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Actually, the climate change is gender neutral. Women or even women maybe suffer more from climate change impacts because there's a lot of women, female farmers in the developing countries, and they are multitask. They are actually the main labor of the farming activities, but also they are busy with household tasks. So if they have the impacts of climate change, their tasks become much harder. So if sustainable agriculture technology can help them to manage farming tasks better, it's really help them. And then also the chair was mentioning the key success of this new technology to help the countries like Sub-Saharan Africa is how to combine new biology and ICT. But to do so, there are some areas still public investment is needed, like soil. This kind of, in order to have digital tools become very effective, like hand-based tools work, that needs digitalized information. And the soil is one of the key parameters to allow precision agriculture for smallholder farmers. And that is something the private company cannot invest. Maybe digital agriculture may be having some private interest, but the soil kind of baseline data still requires a lot of investment from public. And I know some CG centers, like international agriculture centers, working on that. And even that one has benefited from some smart agriculture. They said, I was based in Nairobi 10 years at the ICRA. That has a lot of soil science. They said they used to have wet chemical analysis, which requires a lot of funding and a lot of labor to analyze soil. But now they have a dry analysis. They have some very sophisticated technology to analyze the data very swiftly. And that kind of technology with partners that create a very good information, public goods, to allow this digital revolution can happen. And then also this drought-tolerant kind of varieties, some international organizations have been investing, again, CGI Center, CIMIT. Last September, there was a report published by UN, and then they said this drought-tolerant investment in drought-tolerant species in the developing countries is one of the greatest achievements by international networks. Similarly, we can also looking at biofortified varieties, the women and suffering from malnutrition, especially lack of micronutrients, and that really translates to child mortality. But if you have invested in the public funds to develop this biofortified crops like vitamin A, enhanced maize, sweet potatoes, and iron-rich beans, that really makes a lot of difference to farmers in the developing countries. Maybe I try to cut my comments here.
Well, thank you Thank you very much for this reply. I just want to make one comment. I was very struck by something in microfinance. There's in Kenya, since we talked about Kenya, there's M-Pesa, which is an informal micro credit banking network that works with the mobile phones, and it's amazing to see how very poor people in the slums have been able to take up this technology and use it very effectively. So that is encouraging to think that handheld devices can equally be managed by farmers, especially when we think about Grameen phone also in Bangladesh as an example. And that could bring part of the ICT analytical precision farming inputs, and the other part would come from the new biology, because at the end of the day, the seed is the simplest way of transferring technology. Whether you're a small farmer or a big farmer, you plant seeds, and as a result, that is on the way out. However, let me now turn to David Rosenberg, who has invented truly disruptive technologies. And you got a couple of questions, David, and whatever other observations you wish to make, please take another 2 to 3 minutes to give us your input.
First, it's an honor to be with everyone here today. And thank you for the opportunity to share our story. So the first question was on the developing world and feeding poor in sub-Saharan Africa. It's our ambition. It's not our priority today. And I would share it's analogous to the solar industry. So the solar industry enables distributed energy in sub-Saharan Africa, but it took early adopters in the United States and Germany to embrace solar. Then it took economies of scale, mass manufacturing, China and elsewhere, to bring the cost down and then make solar a viable option for the poor in sub-Saharan Africa and change their lives. In a similar, if you look at innovation patterns, this is my fourth Change the World company, a Silicon Valley-backed company. If you look at the adoption curves, you need those early adopters. Often there's a price premium with new technology, and it just takes time to get the cost down. So today, our focus is we sell in the category of organics. In the US, for example, organics carry about a 20% premium over non-organics, and that premium is important for us to get our costs right. We also today focus on leafy greens because leafy greens have a higher relative price per ounce, and so we're able to get a higher price. And it also fits our value proposition in the sense of they're very sensitive to environment, so they grow in places that are with a very specific humidity, temperature, and seasonality is an issue. But our ambition again is there. The other element is a lot of the poor. There's a correlation between eating salads and education. And a lot of undereducated people don't eat a lot of salad. So there's a behavioral change. One of the hardest, as an innovator, one of the hardest areas to change is behavioral challenges. So it's hard to get people to eat salad. So the demand also isn't there at the level it should. So it also takes an educational component. Case in point, we're building 10 small farms in a city in New Jersey, Jersey City, and here it's focused on the poor to get the behavioral change, get people eating the right foods, which is hard to do. So we take the problem both on the behavioral side, which takes time, as we build up the supply. On the next question, in the energy side. So if you take energy to energy, there's in the field, you don't have to power lights. And while the lights are sophisticated, so the energy hog in spectrum is yellow spectrum. Yellow spectrum is not an efficient spectrum from a photosynthesis standpoint. And it turns out for most plants, it's red and blue spectrum, which is a much cooler spectrum light. It doesn't give us much waste heat that you have to manage. So, but there's still an energy component. If you take the 3 energy components in vertical farming, it's lights, it's pumps, it's HVAC, the climate controls. A lot of those, you have pumps, but you don't have lights in the field, you don't have pumps. But what you also have is a lot more spoilage. You also have in places like California where the leafy greens are produced, you have to ship water from what's often the Colorado River to California. So the pumping, in fact, I think it's about 30% of California's energy bill is moving water around. So just the movement of water, how that gets in the calculus, the spoilage. If in leafy greens, over 50% of what's grown doesn't get consumed, is the measurement what's grown or what's actually consumed? I would argue it's what's consumed. So you have all this waste in the supply chain, including the trucking. So it's a complex, the externalities are hard to put in the calculus. We think it's today about even, but if you look at the macro trends, and if you look at the population, the demographics, and if you look at the efficiencies improved on LEDs, we think what's around even today is going to favor vertical farming in the future for some categories. Like you said, we're not going to grow a tree. We actually can grow a tree, or like Olivia said, but it makes no sense to grow a tree. So what are the crops? What are the problems we should solve, and how do we stay focused on solving those where we can have a positive impact? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Chris, Agent of Syngenta, your comments on the questions that you've received and we've heard. But very briefly, please, because we are running out of time.
Sure, understood. I'll respond to the question about precision agriculture for small-scale farmers. And although technology and innovation is evolving quickly, there's still a large population of farmers who don't have access to these technologies at this stage. But I think it's also important that we meet farmers where they need us, and sometimes on the most common of platforms. And what we are seeing, particularly in Asia, is that many farmers prefer to use the current platforms like Facebook or YouTube or WhatsApp or whatever to get recommendations from their peers and support for their operations. So, as I mentioned before, communicating effectively and efficiently is certainly the first step towards improving behaviour and affecting change. But also it's important to understand that smartphone penetration in Asia is high and only rising. It's expected to be about 80% by 2025. And so this means that most smallholder farmers will have access to a smartphone, and therefore I think there will be opportunities in delivering targeted agronomy services via these platforms that are accessible on smartphones. The last thing I'd say too is, beyond the farm, digital can also help unlock some essential elements that are important to farm holders, such as digital finance or a digital marketplace. Both of those will help farmers adopt more sustainable technology and improve their livelihoods, which is tremendously important.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of that. Our special thanks to the participants and to the panelists. I will just simply say that it is our firm belief that by acting collectively for the common good, motivated by our recognition of our common humanity, driven by caring and compassion for the poorest and the weakest among us, we can help human society overcome the multifaceted challenges to the agricultural and food security system that was brought on by the pandemic and by gender and income inequality, and help place society again on a much stronger and more sustainable path of growth and balanced development. And with these optimistic words to the applications of all you've said, I would like to thank each and every one of you and declare that this session is now officially over. Thank you.